Hello, everyone. Once again, Ramirez here with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts. It's getting a little colder, so I've decided to style up with one of my chaperones. And today I wanted to talk about something. I actually made the video earlier. Unfortunately, it got corrupted, so I have to re-record, and that's probably for the best, so I can spend a little more time on everything. And that is for those of us that are doing Harnischfechten, the weapons of Harnischfechten. This is going to be a two-part series because if I go over everything, it will take too long. So I'd rather just break this up into two videos. We can spend a little more time talking about things. So when we talk about Harnischfechten and weapons forms, there are more weapons than this, but really for most tournaments, most regular combat events, you have four weapons forms. Or four weapons that are commonly used. The dagger kind of goes into everything, but generally it's Rondel Dagger, sword, usually a longsword, which is what we'll be discussing. And then in part two, we'll go over spears, and then we'll go over poleaxes. And what I'm trying to do with this is talk a little bit about the equipment that I use, that we use at TRFA, and that others also tend to use. These are some more common versions that you'll see out there. They aren't the only ones, and I don't want to suggest this is an exhaustive list. But we're going to start out with the Rondel Dagger, because we're going to go from small in the first video and then large in the second video, is Rondel Daggers. And the first I'm going to start out with is one of the safer ones. This is a wooden Rondel Dagger. This comes from Purple Heart Armory. And there are a lot of people who do use these. We use them because, once again, they're solid. So if you're doing like blocks with two hands, there are techniques for that. Or just things where you really need to grab the blade and turn it. This is a good option. It also has a fairly bulbous point. And once again, we know that this will be safe against most helmet oculars. So you're not worried about if you're fighting without pierced plate. It's a much safer option. It fits in the hand well. It fits with the gauntlets. You can do all the techniques. I would say that if you're doing public exhibitions, maybe it doesn't look as fancy as having something in steel, but in terms of teaching and training, I think this is a very good bet. This, as I said, is something we use in the club, and I think that it is very, very helpful. Also, it is one of the more safer options, and if you have students that aren't wearing full armor, um, it's not going to flex. So obviously, getting hit with it is no great pleasure. But that bulbous end, and also it's not as thin as some of the others I'm going to show you. It works. It works within full armor to really find the gaps and press without really potentially injuring someone. So I actually prefer it, especially if you're just doing training with people who are starting out in harness, or people whose kit might not be as complete. If you're doing high historical and you've got everything covered, probably move on to some of the others. But if you have people with minimal kit, or kit that might not quite meet, let's say, the ocular requirements for the Lynx cord or Tacovina cord, this is a good option. I'm going to move on to this, which is a Rondel Dagger from Darkwood Armory. They are working on a newer version, which would be a little more substantial. This one is thin enough, you can actually use this for Blossfechten. I mean, really, this does flex. And it's not the most flexible thing in the world, but it does have flex. The downside is that flex has two problems. One, if I try to grab it for techniques, it's not going to hold really well unless I hold it sideways, and even then there is some bend to it. I've also found that using this against people in harness matches, that flex, sometimes people will say they don't feel it through the mail and the padding. So you need a judge to kind of say, okay, yeah, you hit them in the correct place, because sometimes someone won't fight if they can't feel that pressure. But overall, it's one of the ones I started out with, and I do Still like it, but nowadays I either use the wooden one or the one I'm going to show you next. The one that I'm going to do next is actually part of the reason I was going to do this video because I need to do some fixing on it. This is the new Purple Heart Armory Harnischfechten dagger. And I did a review on this. So if you look on the page, you'll see it has a good fit in the hand. It is very solid. This is very stiff. This is not bending anytime soon. Downside is there is no spatulation. This is probably about 1/8 of an inch of a blade. So some people I know, and I did do a tournament where they did not require tips on these. If you do not have a pierced plate on your visor, this will definitely go through pretty much anyone's ocular. You can get the thinnest Saleh visor out there. This is going to go right through. So according to both DeKoven and Lynx Accord, you should have a tip on this. I can't stress that enough. Though, as I said, I have done an event where they're like, oh yeah, this is fine. Just make sure you're wearing pierced plate on your face and that you have the plate underneath your standard. And I'm like, this can still get around a plate under a standard if someone's really trying to jam it up under your helmet. So I have, at least in my club, and I certainly know that the Accords require you to have a tip on this. If you do, I've talked about this. This is a cane blunt from Purple Heart. The downside to it, even if I try to lock this in, I'll try not to shake the camera too much, is that it does tend to pop off. It's slightly small for this, and even though I push it all the way down, you really have to tape these down, push them all the way in, and even then they tend to want to pop off of these daggers. So you do want to be careful about that. Make sure that your tip, whatever you're using, is properly secured to this dagger. But otherwise, fantastic. Just, once again, I can't stress enough. This needs a point. That thin an edge, even going on to mail or something, you can really press, and because there's zero flex, they will feel it, but it's just shy of doing what the only difference between this and a pointed rondel is if you put a little pressure into a rondel dagger, maybe you get the point enough that they actually feel it on their skin. But this is not going to give. It is a very solid construction. So just be mindful of that. I think that the blunts really do a good job of helping to disperse the force and also giving you a chance to really reduce the risk of potential injury if you're trying to aim for the oculars in a helmet. So that's my thought on this one. This is, as said, what we currently use, me and the people I spar with at the club. Though if I have new people, I will go back to this guy. I don't use as much the Darkwood Armory, but I still think that if you're starting out or if you want something that you can cross over between Blossfechten and harness, that's a good option. So give me one moment and we're going to talk about some longswords. All right, so let's move on to some longswords. Starting out, I have a Purple Heart longsword waster. And once again, great to start out training, especially with specific techniques, especially in techniques that are going to involve the handle. If you are doing like kind of grapples where you're using that the cross guard, or if you're doing something like Mordschlag. Because this is a much lighter weight, you can do that without the potential percussive injuries that you might present with a steel sword. Once again, not as impressive if you're doing like public demonstrations, things of that nature. Everyone likes the clash of steel, but from a very practical standpoint, these are really good to train with. And especially when you have new people that might be worried about getting hit even though they're in full or partial kit, it's a good option. No flex, so if you jam this into somebody, they will feel it. But once again, we could talk a little bit about the point, bring this in the camera, is that it does have a very rounded point, it's fairly wide. Once again, with the ocular issue, you're not really worried this would not go through the oculars unless you have really, really bad, ridiculously wide oculars that you probably shouldn't have. And if you are bringing people into your club, that's one of the things you should always kind of educate people on is their helmets, how they are working. But this does provide some force, but it's not like really, really concentrated. If I do have an open joint somewhere, and like particularly the arms and stuff, you'll feel this. You will know it happened, but you're not going to um, injure someone else. You're really janking it into their arms, but they'll know they've been hit. And once again, with the lighter weight, if you are doing stuff where you're doing cutting against non-armored parts of the body, you're probably better off getting hit with this than you are getting hit with some of the steel swords that are out there that we're going to talk about next. But otherwise, relatively cheap option in the realm of longswords for Harnischfechten. As I said, not the most public presentation, maybe as grand as some others. But once again, if you're training, especially new clubs, doing Harnischfechten, this is a perfectly good option to get people used to doing it. You get used to doing half sorting. This is a much thicker blade than most of the steel blades, and because it does have this fuller in it, you're able to grab it in the center pretty easily and get a hold of that to do your half sorting. So there are a lot of pluses. One other downside that I did not mention, and this is true for the Rondel as well, because they're wood, if they do strike certain parts of armor, they may get little dents and divots. They may get a little bit of a splintering. In my opinion, it hasn't been anything that I couldn't get out with just a little bit of sanding, and it was pretty much sanding, put a little oil on it, good to go. So I do, as I said, recommend these for beginning or for people who do have experience but are doing different and new techniques, because these do handle a little bit better, a little bit safer than some of our other options. Moving right on down the road, let's go to the more or less the gold standard currently in Harnischfechten. And that would be this. This is the Purple Heart Harnischfechten sword. Once again, I have done a basic first impressions review on this. I do really like this sword. It is very thick, as you can see. It is very, very stiff. It is not going to do a lot of flexing. It does have a flat on the bottom third of the blade, but the upper third of the blade, you will notice there is, I can get it to, it's actually one-sided. But you can see that spine here, so it's almost like a triangular, where this is flat, but there is a little bit of a spine on the one side, and that does give it a little more strength and structure to that last third where you're going to be doing your half sorting. It also has a small, and it's very hard to notice, I guess, on camera, hopefully you can see it, that it has this little spacing here where it's wider here and wider here to tell you where to grab it for half sorting. Now, this is not a you have to grab it here, but it's just kind of the sword itself recommends where you should grab it with your gauntlet to do half sorting. And that's a really nice feature because, once again, when you're in your full kit and you have your helmet on, seeing isn't as much a help as feeling. So being able to feel that divot, so you have your hand on it, you can feel that's where I need to be. And that's something that you want. You see it in a lot of the images of swords for Harnischfechten duels. Also, you'll notice that it has a wire wrap that's only halfway leather on one half. This is the part you grip, and this is the part you're going to be fighting with. You might be hitting someone, you might be doing a pommel strike, and to help protect it from the armor and the weapons, it doesn't have a leather all the way through, because this will just get chewed up if you're doing things. You really just want the leather in your glove, on the leather on the sword, and it has a very substantial pommel, so if you are doing Mordschlag, if you are doing pommel strikes, someone will definitely know they got hit with that. Also, you'll notice that on the crossguard itself, it has some wider points. These have been kind of peened down so that, once again, if you are striking like a hammer with it, you're not having a rounded or a regular just point that's going right to someone's head. This does make it wide enough that it is safe in terms of hitting, let's say, the oculars again, that it's not going directly through into the actual eye. We want something where we can stop, we can see it hit in the general area of the ocular without going through. And these wider discs at the end of the crossguard make that a safer design for Harnischfechten. So this is good. This is significantly heavier than a regular fetter for Blossfechten. So once again, people wonder what the difference is. The difference largely is stiffness and weight. That if you're using some of these swords that are specifically for Harnischfechten, they're going to be a lot heavier. They're going to be a lot stiffer, so you can't kind of swap them out. No marshal, judge, whatever you want to call them at a Blossfechten tournament is going to look at your sword and go, yeah, you can go out onto the list. Go right in and fight with that. I get critiqued every so often when I bring my Jablowski Dragas fetter, and this, that thing is just a little corgi compared to this bad boy. So you would definitely know the difference between that and a regular fetter we would use for Blossfechten. Last up is something really cool. Unfortunately, it's also very, very hard to get a hold of. This is the new Harnischfechten sword by Darkwood Armory. As I mentioned in the Rondel section, Darkwood is coming out with some new stuff. For Harnischfechten, they are modifying their Rondel to be something a little more substantial, closer to this in design. This is loosely based on something out of the Fiore manuscripts because it has a striking pommel, a thrusting pommel. So this actually is a rubber tip, and it then has a very heavy weighted pommel. It has rounded points, just like with the Purple Heart was the flat discs. These are rounded ball, but they're still wide, still safe by Dekoven standards as far as the size of it for ocular strikes, that it's not going to go into the ocular itself. This one is much more a diamond shape. I know that the blade is a little thick, but you can see that spine on one side, and then you can see that spine carries over on the other. This is a very stiff blade. Then it does have, instead of that little divot, it has a little kind of gripping point. So this little reduction, this little partial fuller here, helps you with finding where to grab this. If I do, put my whole hand around it, a little bit thinner than the Purple Heart grip, but it's still effective. And once again, gives you that nice long end to, once again, a rubber bullet point. And speaking with Scott at Darkwood Armory, the reason to have this is that unlike a flat, if you have a regular tip on it, this point will help you to find exact gaps and really help you with placement of your sword into the gaps of the actual armor. And once again, this was made as an experimental piece. There were only 6 that were made in the original run. I'm very fortunate that I was able to purchase one of the original 6. This is not on their website, so you'd have to contact Darkwood Armory directly and ask about this and getting one. So that is my starter of some of the weapons I use in Harnischfechten. We're going to go on to the big boys, the spears and the poleaxes, in a part 2 of this video. Once again, I'm Ramirez with Tidewater Renaissance Fighting Arts, and we're based out of Norfolk, Virginia, and I will see you in the next video.